Hi, this is Clio, and you're listening to my new podcast, Bread and Circuses with Clio. I wonder when I'm going to stop calling it a new podcast. But anyway, so before we get into the topic of today's video or podcast, I would like to make an announcement, which is that I got a response on my podcast, I think from last week, of someone who said, "Hey, I'd like to support you on Patreon." And I thought, that's a great idea. At present, I am a starving artist. I make no money hardly. But anyway, I looked into Patreon and I decided to start one. And if you'd like to help support the podcast, help support me, I would like to get a little bit more funding, especially because, I've talked disparagingly about my background being just a nightmare. My camera could be better as well. And I'd love to just invest more into the quality of the podcast and also, some money for basic needs. Because, if I have to work, that means less time content creating, which is what you guys like. But I've definitely honestly under-monetized my social media presence. Like, anytime I get someone hitting me up in my email like, "Hey," for some reason there's this eye contact company that's been bothering me for months. It's like, I am never, with colored contacts, never gonna support you because, again, like, why would I support a company that's wanting you to change your eye color? I feel like there's so many weird implications with that. What does it have to do with my channel as well? So anyway, off that tangent. But I also decided to create a Cameo. So if you want me to send you a video where I wish you happy birthday, or I roast you. I don't know how I would roast you. Okay, I'll try. I can pretend you're Texas garden fairy. Flashback to the last podcast. But if you'd like to support me and just help me out a bit, so I'm not as much. I think spiritually I'm a starving artist. But I'd like to be able to, live more comfortably than I do now. I'm pretty broke, honestly. But anyway, thank you for your support anyway. It actually means a lot. But let's get into the main topic of today's podcast, which is Suburban Gothic. Now, from my perspective, I have always been fascinated by suburbs because it is disparate from where I grew up. I am from Los Angeles, not the greater metropolitan area. I am from the city of Los Angeles. And what's interesting about LA's architecture is that I think LA, as it's set up, it's the world's largest suburb. And there's so many people in the suburb that it became a city. So the layout of Los Angeles is somewhat suburban. There isn't a strong center. There's lots of one-story single-family homes. Even in the heart of the city, you will find tracts of post-World War II suburban housing, ranch-style houses. That is what Los Angeles is based on. Now those houses, even something one-story, 3 bedrooms, and is practically falling apart, is going for $5 million. But that is the setup of LA. But I am an urban, I was a city kid growing up, and that's how I identified. And the suburbs were something that were a bit of a mystery to me. I would sometimes know friends who, they spent a couple of their, younger years in the city, and then their parents decided they were going to chase the American dream and get a single family home. And let me tell you, they went far. And I what's funny? I hate to say it, but white people, sometimes non-white people do this, but I think it's more of a white person hang up is owning a house. Now, my mom, we've never had a house. And my mom and I once talked about this, and she says, why is it that white people are so obsessed with having a house all to themselves? And why can't they just live in the city? Why can't they just live in apartments or, some similar living arrangement? And then I said something that she thought was brilliant, so I'll relate here. I said, it goes back to slavery, which is, if you are part of the land-owning white elite, not all white people were landowning, some were indentured servants. To distinguish yourself as part of the land-owning gentry, you had to own property. And sometimes that also meant owning people as well, and distinguishing yourself from the lower class white people. I once read actually a really interesting book so long ago that I almost have forgotten everything I've learned from it, but it was a popular book. It was called White Trash, and it's all about, I have the cover in my mind. I think it's like the 500-year untold history of class in America or something. And I read all about the history of kind of this is not what the podcast is about, but this is a quick aside because I think it is relevant, of the, white people that are not considered by other white people to be the acceptable kind of white people. And interestingly, a lot of times it is kind of more racial, where white people draw that line. Like, for instance, Italians and Jewish people, racially are considered maybe not fully and comfortably inhabiting whiteness the way that, English, German, Scottish descent people do, but they're still considered white. It's a different, well, actually, honestly, as a Jewish person, I don't know what I am, because I think I'm white, and then I got some, Nazi telling me that I'm not. So, okay. It's actually really complicated with Jews, the whiteness thing, but I'm not even going to get into it now. But when it comes to poor white people, we even call it poor white people as almost an ethnic distinguisher. White people want to distance themselves from that label of white trash, of the underclass of white people. And I find it interesting how, and I think I've been seeing some interrogation for these negative stereotypes, these classist stereotypes of white people, and how, portrayals of hillbillies and, again, white trash. I mean, it's such a stark term. I think in the book White Trash, if I remember correctly, they were defined in the 18th and 17th century as waste people. So this association with, poor white people, again, poor white people is not just white people who don't have money. It's almost an ethnic distinguisher. And I remember that's what the book talked about. And how making fun of that type of person is actually very acceptable in the media. And it just shows it's not only white supremacist, in that it kind of is this unflinching mockery of, what whiteness could be, and kind of the absurdity of whiteness. Like, these types of white people aren't the gentry kind of white people. They're the, other type of white people. But anyway, going back to what I was initially talking about, this wasn't my initial, I've been wanting to make videos about kind of the distinguishing class of poor white. I think that that's really fascinating and relatively under-discussed. Although I have seen, again, some murmuring discussions of, poor white trash and that whole, and how that does feed into white supremacy in and of itself. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So for white people to not be part of that, and this is deeply entrenched in kind of the white hegemony, that they don't want to be the renting class or the indentured class. They want to be the landowners. Whiteness as a construct is about owning. It's about it's seen as inherently a status symbol to be white, which is why white people will make distinctions, like I'm not that type of white person. That white person is trash, literally. That's what they call them. So to distinguish yourself as not white trash or poor white people, you need to own a home in the white consciousness. And you will find white people go to the depths of the interior of the country. And this is from an American perspective, of course, to get their house. I have known people, they had great jobs. They had friends. They had an entire social life. And that encroaching fear of being a poor white person started, influencing them more. It's a cultural expectation. And then they decided to pack up and move to some hideous location way out in the desert where it gets to be 125 in the summer, or, some horrible place where there's biohazards everywhere. But they have their house. And I've never lived in a house in my entire life. I've only ever lived in an apartment situation. It is what I am accustomed to. It is my orientation. So not only have I always felt very disparate from people who had homes, just in general, I never understood that need, and it is a need, for a single family home. But I think that there is these deeper class struggles within the white community, that this kind of interplay. And that's why, part of the reason why we have the environmental destruction of places that are untouched and wild being slowly suburbanized is because of this. White flight is a little bit different of a concept, but this white conquest of nature, because they need to have their house. And the farther away from the coast and the farther away from the cities, the cheaper it is to attain property. So, and I go on drives all the time. I love going on road trips, even if it's just for the day. I like going to the desert. I like going, I actually don't live very far from the beach, being from LA, but, San Diego. And especially in the desert, you will find these pristine landscapes. And then you have this ominous sign, new developments. And sometimes they even build these developments right next to the freeway. Right next to it. That is a biohazard. That is such a... Let me try to readjust my mic. Hang on. Okay. That is a biohazard. You are inhaling toxic fumes, but you have your house. And it fascinates me as someone who's from an urban center and has never desired to not be. Now, I have visited the suburbs. Most notably, even though I didn't travel much as a kid, I had an aunt and uncle that lived in a suburban housing tract. And I stayed at their place a lot. They had some kind of 5-bedroom house, 2-story house. They had a pool in the backyard. They had a trampoline. And, I'd go out. I called it the country. It's agrarian where they lived. They lived in Ventura County, which is the county north of Los Angeles. So you have, Ventura County, Los Angeles County, Orange County. So, not that far from LA, but it's agricultural. It's a farming community. And, it is slightly arid, I guess. Ever so slightly. I think it's a little more arid than LA, or maybe just LA has bulldozed all of its nature. But I remember as a child, not quite, you gain more awareness as you age. And I noticed, wow, there's a lot of rock formations near here. A lot of boulders. That's interesting. Wow, there's farms, but what I realized, and this social class disparity, is that their house was a lot larger than mine. My brother especially loved that their house was a lot larger than ours. And it was like I got to cosplay being a suburban upper middle class kid when I was staying with them. And I, you know, I'd walk these streets and they were so pristine, and we could walk at night. There was no fear. We walked the dogs at night, and I've used evocative imagery of suburban housing tracts as an extended metaphor for capitalism and the standardization of people and the systemization, you get what I mean, of human society, and how eventually we'll all be turned into suburban housing tracts. And again, this is something that in LA, there's a little bit of the suburban housing tract thing, yeah. I mean, a lot of people moved to LA post World War II, purchased their single family home after the war, and most of those houses are dilapidated at this point. Decades have not been kind to them. They were assembled quickly and efficiently. And, you have just dilapidated houses that in and of itself are worth relatively little, if anything, because they're located in LA. They're millions of dollars just because they're a house. I don't even know who lives in... Actually, I do know who lives in the house, because I remember I actually had a... Sorry, my voice is getting a little scratchy. I had a summer job last summer. It was a bad job, let me tell you. I didn't even last there. But anyway, kind of the churn and burn. We're going to take young college kids and work them to death. It radicalized me, I'll tell you that. But that story's for another day, what that company was like. But anyway, or organization, they weren't talking about a company. Okay, so I was knocking on people's doors all around LA, and I saw who lived in these houses. And I've driven past them all my life, and this is, the city center, I went to Hollywood, I went to Westwood, knocking on people's doors, and they, with varying degrees of success. And some of these houses were quite wealthy. I mean, some of them, I even went to the Hollywood Hills, which is an exclusive luxury neighborhood. It is, the houses are worth 20, 30, 40 million dollars. Celebrities live there. And I was just knocking on their door and, selling them stuff. And, how they treated me as like a lowly salesperson, again, it was a radicalizing experience. I had anti-consumer culture sentiments beforehand, but after I had the summer job, again, this was last summer, you'll notice my content gets a heck of a lot more anti-capitalist after this experience, because I saw who lives in these houses. First of all, Los Angeles is a minority-majority city, as is California as a state. Most of the homeowners in California, or in Los Angeles, probably California too, are old white people. And some of them were 80, 90 years old, still living on their property. And I found that to be distasteful. We have a housing crisis, and, you have a large property, you have, a backyard, kids are deprived of nature, they could use it. I remember my own parents when I was younger, saying, oh, these old people, they hold on to their houses and they don't let them go, and they should distribute it back to the community and give it to a young couple with children who need the space. And I agree. But when I went to the Hollywood Hills specifically, which is where I think, the interesting part is, I remember walking through the neighborhoods. I've driven through the Hollywood Hills. I've never walked through it. And I remember the pavement was so smooth, and it's hilly. I'm kind of huffing and puffing up. And, I knock on the doors, and I just see, first of all, again, most of the homeowners are white. And the door swings open, and it's usually some kind of maid or some kind of housekeeper, and they're usually people of color and, you know, white people in the house. It just creepy. Really creepy. Disturbing even. And I remember one incident that really stuck with me. And I actually wasn't alone. I was on my first day and I was being, you know, I had a guide. And, you know, she was telling me how to, you know, knock on people's doors and get money out of them. So we walk up to one house and we knock on the door, and then, you know, the door swings open and it's some kind of housekeeper. I don't know what the terms are, to be honest. Someone who's employed to keep up the house. And she speaks to us, and I'm trying to, you know, communicate with her, you know, and we're not really able to talk to her much, you know, and that's fine. People have differing levels of English proficiency. And then this guy, this like 40-year-old dude is on the roof, or not the roof, but he's on this like balcony arrangement. And he looks down on us, and we're at the door, and he's up on his balcony, and this is several stories, probably about a 5-story house. And he looks down on us, and he's like, "Hey, kids." And the way he said it was almost flirtatious. And again, I was acutely aware that this is a rich and powerful 40-year-old man, and I'm a 20-year-old scrappy young woman, almost borderline a girl. And then he just was like, "I'll donate to your little cause." And God, and then he came down the steps, you know, came to the front door, and he was just like, "So, where are you girls from?" And it was so icky. And I remember when he came to the door, he like pushed aside, like actually physically pushed aside the housekeeper and to talk to us. And I just was like, you have a fundamental disrespect of people you think are of a lower social station than you. It's obvious. The fact that you saw us, you know, the squirrel and I, as basically fresh meat, unassuming college-age girls who are trying to make money over the summer, and then you treat your housekeeper like actually manhandling her. And just, it was such an insight into the lives of these elite people. He probably had a $40 million house. And this is, I don't know who he was, how he got his money, but all I know is it was a disturbing incident. And it stuck with me. It really has, because it's one thing to look at these houses from the outside, but when you actually look at who lives there. And I saw other people too. I saw, you know, very young women and very old men. Like, I saw this one woman who came to the door, and she was like 45, a blonde woman. That was also when I realized, like, I again, I know in the white community, blondness is a status symbol. But you don't fully realize how much it must be until you're knocking on rich people's houses, and all of these women have blonde hair. Every single one. And if they don't naturally have blonde hair, they're dyeing it. And this, you know, woman came to the door, and she was, you know, dressed up. She had a red dress and pearls, and I'm sure she designer, considering where she lived. And, you know, I'm trying to talk to her like, "Hey, you want to help, you know, the environment or whatever?" And she's just like, "Oh, I have to go out with my husband." And then her husband comes to the door, and he's kind of all dressed up too. Says, we're going out for the evening, and you know, we don't have time, we're sorry. Again, like, this organization turned out to be kind of low-key, legally fraudulent, but a pyramid scheme that was a bit fraudulent and really wasn't helping the environment. I learned that the hard way, unfortunately. But, you know, we thought we were helping the environment, and they just, you know, they didn't care. And we had our face, or they looked at us, they looked at the clothes we wore, they looked at, you know, and I saw the way that they treated people they saw as a lower social station. They knew that we were coming into their neighborhood as solicitors, and there was this almost contempt of us, this dehumanization of us, and especially of the people whose jobs it is to maintain their houses, their properties. And not only is it deeply white supremacist the way that whole arrangement was, but it just shows that these dynamics that were forged in the 17th, 18th, 19th century United States are still paralleled with the ultra elites when they have, and it just, again, it was a very disturbing experience to see who actually lives in these $40-50 million mansions. And it was a radicalizing experience too. I came back from that disgusted. I remember just being repulsed on a deep level. I thought, who really are these people? And again, I've been woke for a while, right? There's intellectually knowing something, and then there's feeling it. Like, who are these ultra elite people? And I met them. I talked to them. I knocked on their doors for multiple days in a row. And again, I'm trying to remember specific instances, except for the creepy guy who, again, he was on his balcony and we were down below, and he was almost like, again, it's literally so primal. Like, he had like the top position on the tree, and we're the lower ranking whatever. Like, I know in monkey societies, whoever's on the top of the tree has the highest status, and the groundlings don't. It's a less sheltered position, whatever. And just seeing the way that hierarchy, quite literally, above and below, and it makes you think of deconstructing language as well. I mean, I get a lot of people on my TikTok who don't quite know what I'm getting at when I say things like, princess treatment, reinforces power dynamics and hierarchies, or, classiness, and, all these other things. People think I'm reading too deeply into it. When I have a presumably multi-millionaire, standing over me like that, and obviously getting a power trip out of it, makes you really question things. And, being treated like I'm not really a human. And, I mean, if I thought I wasn't being treated like a human, the way that these people were treating their housekeepers was disturbing. Absolutely disturbing. But anyway, that aside, I actually never intended that was going to be part of this podcast, but now you know why I became, I've always been anti-elitist. I've always been critical of hoarders of immense wealth, but there's a difference between intellectually knowing it and seeing. Again, these people's houses, they were so opulent. It disgusted me. It was gross. And it's not even pretty. And that's where I was getting at, actually. Is, you ever noticed the more expensive a house, the less it looks like you could actually live there? Like, for instance, a lot of modern, sleek architecture, maybe this is my own personal preference, but they'll have, floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything has a white reflective surface, and it's meant to display cleanliness. Again, that efficiency. And if you've ever seen futuristic designs, in movies and aesthetics, you'll see that there's a sleekness to the design. Everything is usually a light color, usually white or light gray. And there's this expansiveness of the environment. It is this sterility. And I couldn't imagine actually living there. Now, a lot of modern architecture, a lot of these modern apartments, even if they're not very expensive, they kind of mimic this luxury design. Like, I can't imagine, in some of these opulent spaces, what if I have a stomach flu. Would I feel cozy there? No. What if I have a nightmare in the middle of the night? Would I feel comfortable in my own home? God, no. I'd be like, why is it so sleek and efficient? Or what if I'm just sad that day? Do I want to be in an environment where, and that's the thing about these, I know I gave those examples, but that's the thing about this particular architectural style of, luxury or faux luxury, is that in its attempt to convey an idealistic future, it just erases any feelings that you can be anything less than perfect yourself. And some people really like that architecture. They love it. I think it's about my house. I mean, you guys haven't seen much of it, but if you can tell by it's chaotic. We own a lot of stuff. I mean, there's books and random items, because my mom has a bit of a shopping addiction from Amazon. She just buys not even shopping like makeup and all that stuff, but like just random this is gonna improve our lives, household appliances. Everything's chaotic and disorderly, and I love it that way. The lighting isn't too harsh, and I feel like it's cozy. I feel like I can retreat. It is a safe space. But the thing about these luxury people, or these elite people, these upper class people, is they don't process emotions like other people do. I think that luxury stunts development. I think, how they say that, a person gets solidified at the age they became famous? I think there's a similar immaturity in very wealthy people. And if they've been rich their whole lives, I'm not sure what it is about excess that corrupts a person's mind. Maybe it's that they're implicitly told that they're special. It's kind of like, the parent that tells their child that they're a genius, and they're smarter than other people. They internalize that, I have all this stuff and there's kids who don't, and, I get whatever I want. And I also know in these elite families, they have nannies and housekeepers, and, they're not really with their actual parents a lot of the time. I'm sure my mom's gonna listen to this podcast, and she's gonna say, "Oh, you're talking about me a lot," but she used to teach driving, at a driving school that serviced people in the Bel Air, Hollywood Hills, Beverly Hills region, and she got a lot of rich kids. She even taught Ivanka Trump how to drive, which is, she always mentions that whenever, and she says, these kids, she picked them up from their mansions. First of all, I think there was one, it might have even been the Trump house. I'm not sure. It might have been another one. Don't quote me on this, but she had to go to the servants' entrance. She couldn't even go through the front door. She had to be at the servants' entrance to pick up the kid who was going to drive. Again, these social, these little social not practicalities of, there's a word I'm thinking of, social dynamics, polite, I'm trying to think of, I don't know why the word is escaping me, but there's a particular word, social particularities, where finishing school and teaching people how to properly behave, there's something about it that's first of all very, dare I say, European. American society at the lower levels doesn't function this way. And the reason I say European is I think it's evocative of, royalty and royal dynamics, subject and king and queen, and that relationship, your highness, your majesty. And I think that's why it doesn't, in the US, we don't have as much of a history of that kind of very clear-cut blood-based hierarchy. It exists, but it's not as clear as, I'm born in this family, therefore I will rule the world, or I will rule this region. And suburbs, going back to it, some suburbs are for very wealthy people. And I think that wealthy suburbs are a bit overrepresented in depictions of suburbia and suburban Gothic. What is the Gothic genre? I probably should have mentioned this a lot earlier, but the Gothic genre is meant to elicit feelings of unease, of creepiness. It is meant to make you question axioms. It is meant for you to even mistrust your reality, that you are an unreliable narrator. And the Gothic genre can be used as an allegory to depict political strife, social dynamics, human nature. And the thing about suburban Gothic is it's an extremely popular genre. I mean, it manifests in many forms. Like, for instance, everything from, Pretty Little Liars is kind of suburban Gothic, or, even something like To Kill a Mockingbird, although I think that's more Southern Gothic. It's a vast genre. But I think that there's, like, I can't tell you how many, it's almost a cliche, but it's how many TV shows have the premise, small town, big secrets. I think that's a little overplayed. But not all suburbs are created equal. Some suburbs are upper class. They are meant to be an enclave for white people. And oftentimes suburban white people aren't quite as wealthy as urban white people. Well, that's actually not true. They have like their little Hamptons and, whatever. But I think for the most part, a white person in LA is going to be a lot wealthier than a white person way out in the middle of nowhere. Because that's all they could afford. And again, adjusted for the price and the price of housing in the area and the average salary of the region, someone who is very wealthy in their little hick town is lower middle class in Los Angeles, But anyway, so in general, I'm so sick of seeing media that revolves around rich people. Like, I get it. They have a life that I don't. They have certain... Again, I think upper class society, because it's all about maintaining power and an iron fist around your resources. Again, big town, little town, big secrets, that whole thing. But when we think about suburban housing tracts, when we think about the standardization of living, of housing, it reflects a far deeper impulse, not only of white society, but capitalism broadly speaking, which is that we are all commodities. People glamorize their little 5-bedroom house in the suburbs. They went way out there and probably inflicted some environmental damage to attain. Oh, they romanticize it. And every house looks the same. They're all beige on the outside, and they all have kind of that spacious, semi-sleek, kind of faux luxury material. But if you've ever been in one of these houses, there's something about it that feels very rickety. Like, it feels like it's going to collapse at any moment. I don't know what they're building these things with. And the walls are so thin. I've heard other people talk about this, but where I live is 50 years old, and the walls are thick and they're insulated. But these new houses, it's like you can hear everything, and it's so echoey. What's up with the echoey? I don't want echoey. I want I don't like this kind of housing. I don't. I haven't grown up around much of it, but I do know it exists. And as someone who's an outsider wandering in, I find these places fascinating because there is something inherently Gothic, I think, about a suburban housing tract. It is a microcosm of how we are all commodities. We are standardized. We are mass produced, just like the houses. There is no room for individuality. There's no room for lack of efficiency. Everything is just what it needs to be. There's no character. There's no flaw. There's no intrigue in design. There's no history. That's another big deal. There's no history. And again, not everything needs to be 200 years old to have history. But even a house like mine, or it's not really a house, but half a century old, it feels lived in. It feels like a shoe that you've, walked around in. But when you buy a brand new house in a new development and you have that sleek interior, the faux luxury of it all, the spaciousness, the echoiness, it all just confounds into this profound loneliness of end-stage capitalism. And again, we haven't reached end-stage capitalism, but it's a precursor to it, because I think that Suburban Gothic, I think that suburbs are cancerous. I think that they grow. They're diseased. I think there's something about it, like I've seen lots of depictions of, we have COVID obviously, but I've seen lots of depictions of how disease spreads, of how epidemics occur, and how insidious it can be. But the thing about epidemics is that they're not merely viral. And I mean that both in the sense that it is microbial, but also, virality of the internet. But instead, ideas can latch onto hosts, and they can breed, and they can multiply. And I think that with suburbs, there's something about it. They're characterless. And I think about suburban strip malls, and I have a whole video on this that's much more succinct than my podcasts, which are a bit more conversational. But regardless, I have seen, again, there's a difference between upper class and lower class strip malls. I can make a part 2 of this video, honestly, because there's so much to say. But podcast video. But the lower class, or lowish class suburbs, the strip malls, I'd say reminiscent of about the 1980s, around that era of architectural design. Usually about one story. You drive into it, they have their little outlets, maybe if 1 or 2 ma and pa stores. But then you've got McDonald's. You have Chick-fil-A. Something that you're in the depths of the suburb is if you see the Chick-fil-A with a mile-long line. You're in it. Everything is so spread out because everyone needs to have their house. Everyone needs to have their space. But strip malls are the cultural hub. It's the downtown. It's the city center. You have maybe an Olive Garden in some of these places, and that is their social life. Everything is branded. I mean, I know that corporately sponsored towns are nothing new, but there's something about it, Suburbia brought to you by Chick-fil-A. Everything is branded, including you. There was a school that was built, an elementary school, that was built about 10 years ago, and I remember, probably actually longer ago than that, but I remember I was eligible to attend in 5th grade, which is when it opened for me. And I remember thinking, wow, it's a new school. It had kind of an interesting design. It had kind of like a modernist, not modern, actually that's like a whole thing, modernist, but kind of like, again, I'm not privy to architectural terms, but it looked, I'm not privy to architectural terms, but it looked like something that's been made in the last 10 years, yeah. And then I just was curious. I saw pictures of it online, and this is an elementary school. We're talking 5 to 11-year-olds are going to be studying here. And it looked like a corporate boardroom. It was like corporate boardroom core for kids. And they had like those little rolly chairs, all adult looking, and then they had little round tables and everything. They had like a little whiteboard and the gray carpeting, and there was just like, where's the love? Where's the soul? Where's the nurturing of these young developing minds? You are constructing an employee. And that's the thing about suburbs. And this school wasn't in a suburb, but a little bit actually. Is that it's designed to construct a future employee of some company. You are branded from infancy. All you know is corporate. That's it. All you know is these multi-conglomerate mega corporations. Can you imagine growing up in a suburb? Again, especially suburbs that are, sorry, my dad's phone is literally so loud because, he's partially deaf. Okay. Can you imagine living in a suburb and your cultural center is the shopping mall with Olive Garden? And maybe we eat at the Cheesecake Factory, maybe. You have some kind of rinky-dink park. And let's be honest, parks in these kinds of places are just, they're awful. They're actually awful. There was a park I had growing up. The same, actually, it was right next to the school that they built. I hated this park. I remember my dad telling me it was a private park, whatever that means. I remember having, was about 6, having a conversation about private versus public and what that entailed. I didn't know. Flashback to childhood. Anyway, and it was just like, there was a fence around it. And there was like a soccer field with this like fake grass. And it was just like, it was so, the equipment was so safe. And like safe. And I hated this park. I actually really hated this park. But that's what these parks look like. And, you have these parks where, you have these suburbs where you have, you're walking down the lane and you have these identical housing tracks. It is perfectly mirroring. It is conformity embodied. And then you get to the park. And again, it's like this fake synthetic grass a lot of the time. Or even worse. When I was a kid, I remember, oh yeah, this park has sand. And the sand is like nasty. Like, yeah. Like the low budget parks. You know what I mean. The thing is, when you're a kid, you have kind of like a sense of like, which parks are the ones that have a lot of money going to them and which ones are kind of, whatever. And you got, you got like 1 or 2 swings and you got some kind of, whatever. And another thing about suburbia in general is that people aren't outside. And this is not a unique insight. People have talked about, how no one walks. There aren't third places or, whatever they call it, except for the mall. Like, yeah, the mall, there might be something, but malls are dying too. But anyway, the internet is a mall. That was another video. Again, that video didn't really do very well, but it's one of my favorite videos where I talk about how in a capitalistic society, malls, or the concept of it, is like matter. It cannot be created or destroyed or only transformed. In a capitalistic society, there needs to be a place of some kind where you can shop, a place that is an arcade of material luxuries that are attainable for a middle class or maybe barely, upper lower class person, that they can cosplay, that they're on Rodeo Drive, but it's the mall. And you have these outlet stores. I actually find malls to be quite liminal. Like, if you've ever seen liminal spaces on TikTok or, I don't know, wherever people, Pinterest, I don't know, you will find so many of them depict malls. Because it's it's a bit of a subversion of reality. Now, again, I think that the internet itself can be liminal in its own right. I think that, we're not physically there, but I think there is a Gothic element to the internet. Like, we have our little stores, which is, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, what other apps we might be using. And it's just like a mall. We walk into the store, it has a certain aesthetic. It's, and the thing is about the mall is that it's a physical manifestation of capitalism. It is a physical manifestation of consumer culture. It is a physical place where you can walk around. But the internet is ethereal. You can't touch the internet. You can touch a phone, but you can't live in the internet. Although I try. But that's the thing about malls, is that malls are, actually, I feel like I said it a lot better in this video, so I'll look it up now. Of course, my app is updating. Okay, we're gonna cut this out. Cut it out. Okay, so I found the video where I talk about malls. I also talk about the liminality of indoor play areas. And I feel like suburban playgrounds also have this liminality, this creepiness to them. Because, again, it is this, we're in this hyper consumerist environment. And we have a playground, which is something that is inhabiting the imagination. Children play in a sunless microcosm of consumer culture. Yeah, the indoorness of mall play areas, like there's no sun. And another thing is, when I was a kid, I used to go, I don't know how many people did this or how popular these were. I used to go to indoor play places. Like the McDonald's one, but I don't know if they're still popular or they're still around. COVID probably killed them, but when I was younger, I went to indoor play places, and there is a liminality to them. Again, if you look at liminal spaces and liminal space art, a lot of times they depict indoor play places because there is something about it, because it's the expansiveness of imagination, especially childlike inquisitiveness. Children are meant to be outside. And it's inside. It's indoors. It's locked. So you have this vibrancy of the play structures. And then you often have, it's often renting a strip mall space or something similar to it. So it's very mathematically, rectangular. And there's this feeling of being trapped. That you could be in this timeless, the world can go on outside and you're stuck in this play place forever. There's something about it that's disturbing and eerie. I said the imposing influence of the storefronts looming over them. It was when I saw the play area I was reminded of my own childhood. Oh yeah, I talked about when I went to the mall that was practically empty and I saw the play place. Or what about those little kiddie rides? When they have a frog or something. You put in a couple quarters and then you're right. I have seen so many liminal space art depicting it. It's one of those things where, I actually love liminal spaces as an art form. I think that, I'm always talking about things are problematic. I think that it is brilliant. I think that there is something about it that just, a picture says 1,000 words. And when you see, it's like you suck the vibrancy, you suck the life, you suck the people out of a location, and it's stripped bare for what it is. And you can see like an empty mall. When there's no people that give it life, it is completely soulless. And I think that the most liminal spaces seem to be indoors. And I think that especially as children, we are perceptive. Like, this is a place that should be outside, but it's inside. But there's a surrealness to malls. And I said malls are some of the most common depictions of liminal spaces. When the noise and commotion is stripped away, its bleakness is uncovered. Not to mention that malls are a common setting of dreams, at least my own. So I'll elaborate on that. I know so often whenever I talk about, because I love talking about my dreams, I have weird dreams. Like, I had this dream, not last night, but 2 nights ago. I went to a Lana Del Rey concert and she sucked. And I don't even listen to Lana Del Rey hardly. And I had put on these like 3D glasses and I saw this like really trippy like visual. And Billie Eilish was there, circa the, green hair era, and then I left. I don't know, like my dreams are weird. And there was something else that happened in the dream I don't remember now, but I remember having a conversation with Billie Eilish. Anyways, it's like I'm all anti-celebrities, like, yeah, Billie Eilish and Lana Del Rey were in my dreams. Anyway, so whenever I talk to people about their dreams, they're like, yeah, I had a dream I was in a mall. And I think the reason why malls are such a common setting for dreams is because there is a creepiness to it. There's a liminality. There's a surrealness to it. And I think that we subconsciously detect it when we're perusing it. And, when there's people around, we're like, it's okay. But I think that for people, malls are kind of like, they're kind of like train stations. They kind of look like train stations. They're kind of echoey and large and kind of spacious, and they look a lot like train stations actually. So it can represent being in between two places. See what else I said. I need to make more videos like this. Malls are common setting dreams, at least my own, and it is our subconscious mind grappling with the ever looming threat of end-stage capitalism. It's a diorama of a corporatocracy. It is. Like, if the world was entirely inhabited by corporations, it would look like a mall. That is true. That's why it evokes this claustrophobia that maybe there is no way out, that we could be trapped in an alternate dimension of consumerism forever. Malls have always been an excess plane of existence, but instead of a tangible experience, it is now downsized to the 4 corners of your phone screen. Now, I think that for human beings, squares and rectangles as a shape elicit feelings of claustrophobia innately. I think that, we think of it as, buildings, especially buildings that are, very streamlined. And then when we think about our phone, I got my little video of myself here. Really, really attractive freeze frame there. We have the 4 corners. We have this being trapped. It's like a store. Our phone. It's like a building. It's like, again, a building that is streamlined and standardized. The 4 corners of your phone screen. The internet is a mall equipped with movie theaters. I put a picture of Netflix. Shopping and socialization. I put shopping with Amazon and socialization being text message. So long as we exist in a capitalistic society, malls are like matter. It cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. I love this video so much. I love this video. Again, sometimes videos, I'll be honest with you, are a little too deep for TikTok. Like, again, like my podcasts, I didn't script this one, but I'm thinking about making a podcast where I just script the whole thing. And again, I really premeditate what I'm going to say. Funny, because I actually don't really script my videos much, but when it's a 3-minute video, I can really hone in on what I want to say, and it kind of flows. But if it's I gotta talk for an hour, it's a little much there. But then maybe you guys like the more conversational thing. But yeah, there is an absurdism to malls. There's an absurdism. I'd love to make, like, these are things where I feel like what people don't understand about my TikTok is that, yes, I am a social commentator, but ultimately I'm kind of a poet. Like, I will, sometimes I won't even make a very strong thesis statement in my video. It's just, I'm coming up with lines that, really contextualize and make you fathom something, make you visualize it, liken something to another thing. And, I think sometimes people don't really realize that my videos are kind of artistic. I don't think people understand that. Not all of my videos are super artistic, but I think that particular video was. It was meant to be almost like a... It was meant to be almost like a, like spoken word poetry. Like, some of my videos are absolutely, like, every line is some kind of spoken word poetry. Other videos, I have more of a strong, this is what we're talking about today. Which is why I'd love to make music. I'd love to write poetry and, fiction. I think I would really thrive with that. And, I like to write, and I think you can tell. But I think the indoorness of malls, of even suburbs, and even in indoor playgrounds, there's a reason why, as especially Gen Z, we find these things horror-like. Just like how with previous generations, there was a time where trains were the creepiest thing people could think of, right? They still kind of are, but less so. It's more of something in the collective consciousness, or wired phones, or boxy TVs. Like, we're getting to the point now where really old 2000s eras computers are getting romanticized. Those things were ugly. Like, okay, whatever. But anyway, I think I'm gonna wrap up this podcast now. I mean, this would be a great thing to revisit at a later date, because I think it's really fascinating. But Suburban Gothic, I just think all of these things are fascinating. Again, I'm still kind of feeling out the podcast. I'm going to be making a lot more videos much more frequently, so don't worry about that. I'm going to be working hard for you guys. But do you want me to really script them out, or do you like it the way it is? Because I'm in between, because do I want it to just be a really long TikTok video? Because honestly, that's a lot of effort. Or do you want it to be just me conversational? This is probably more akin to how I would talk in real life. I mean, again, I'm kind of talking to nothingness. There's the camera, and cameras kind of look like eyes. Like, if you've ever peered into a lens of a camera, it's, hi. There's something about it that's actually quite liminal. Like, that's almost a liminal space, the lens of a camera. Okay, anyway, screw the elites. Free Palestine. I hate rich people. People who live in the Hollywood Hills suck. And, catch you guys later. I need to figure out a cool way to end this podcast, because now I end it like live stream. It's like, catch you guys later. Bye, guys. Later, dudes. Okay, that's gonna be my new outro. Later, dudes.